outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday Twilight Show of Teachers Talk Radio. We are back to school, back to the shows, and today's topic is going to be a very exciting one, student belonging, especially in higher education. In these Tuesday Twilight shows, we always focus on a hot topic in higher education, which I discuss with my brilliant guests, who I also have today, and will very shortly introduce to you. We always say how much students are important, how much we center everything around them, and that is the real intention. I truly believe in that. But how do we succeed? How much is it possible? How can we really do that? This is the topic for today, talking about the challenges, the traps, some of the examples, and I will very shortly invite my two brilliant guests to talk about it and to discuss together. But before that, I would like to thank our partner, Hachette Learning, who this show is brought to you in partnership with. They are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So if you'd like to level up your professional development, please visit this site and look up. They have many, many great publications. Join us live on LinkedIn and all the other social media channels. And please be part of the conversation and ask questions or share your own opinion or your own examples. But now I'd like to invite to the stage two brilliant speakers. So one of them is Dr. Tom Ritchie. Hi, Tom.
Hi to me.
Tom Ritchie is the Director of Student Experience at University of Warwick and also a Fulbright Scholar, right, Tom? And are you now in the US, Tom, or still in the UK?
I'm still in the UK. I'm going just later this month in about 3 weeks.
Okay, cool. So we could still catch you. Thank you so much for actually coming back to the show as you previously was here already. And our other speaker is the fantastic Inka Heider-Wright, who is also returning. Hi, Inka. Very nice to see you again. Who is a graduate management trainee at University of Warwick. And very, very great to have both of you here. And actually, their project, which we later talk about, won an Advanced AG award for collaborative working together for the student experience, and we'll talk about that later. But before that, I'd like to ask both of you and your views. Inka is representing the student voice in this, and this is why it's very important once we talk about student belonging, and Tom, the academic, but obviously working together in partnership. Let's talk a bit about what student belonging is. What, in this context, what do we mean by that? Obviously, when I don't know about you, but a long time ago when I attended university, it was not even a thing. Nobody mentioned it. We didn't even have actually a department for students or any kind of, and nothing really. And it was like, we are the students, we attend, classes, we should just follow whatever is there. And obviously we organized ourselves. We did some parties. It was a mainstream university, right? Then it started to become, as much as my research shows, but you will tell me what more about it, the beginning of the 2000s. And then there was a college student sense of belonging research done in 2012 by Terence Strayhorn in the US. And this was college student sense of belonging. I will later on shed a link to it. And this specifically evidenced the correlation between student belonging and student performance, and how he defines belonging, student belonging in the higher education context is students perceive social support on campus, a feeling or a sensation of connectedness, the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the campus community. And his research really focused more on the marginalized groups. And obviously belonging became more prominent at the time of COVID, where actually there was no real connection, in-person connection with the lecturers and each other. And research always mentioned it in relation to the more marginalized groups or widening participation groups. So this is what I can add to the subject, but now I'm handing it over to you, how you would define it in a very brief way for everybody for the context of this discussion.
I think I'm going to jump in. I think two things that stick out. One, within that kind of definition, it says about campus, and not all students actually go to campus, sometimes ever. So like straight away, it's kind of like, well, I guess that maybe shows how things have evolved since maybe that time point, and how, technologies have advanced, and we have Open University, and which has been around for a long time. But these, there's so many more courses now that are completely online, and it's so what does belonging look like then? Is it still there, or does it look a bit different? And so I think also that kind of ties into what I was thinking of. I guess I don't see it as a singular thing. I think if people go, oh, we need to make sure that this is what belonging means at our institution, you're going to straight away exclude people. So I think it's being open to the fact that it is a very individual and personal experience, and it can be found in lots of different ways. And so for there's so many factors that influence a sense of belonging, and for some students it's just they want to come, they want to crack on with the studies, and that's all they are needing from that space and place and time. Others, they are really looking for those social connections, and that can be a key driver for why they go to university. But yeah, I'll kind of let Tom give his thoughts on that. But those are kind of two things.
Inka, these are very good points, and actually you can see how much it changes since the research when it was in 2012, and then COVID came. They didn't even think back then about the fact. But even before COVID, actually, there were some times we didn't spend in the campus, right? It's not the time that the only place. But before we go to Tom, how you would define it, Inka, just in very briefly, if somebody asked you, okay, well, what is this?
I guess it depends if they are wanting me to give an overview on my own personal experience of how I experience belonging, if that makes sense. Because if say, for example, I kind of think about, how would I define belonging? And I think about the work that Tom and I have done in terms of speaking with students and staff alike, and the core themes that come out from there. So the core themes that came up were kind of inclusion, connection, mattering, trust, and empowerment. And it's really interesting because so originally empowerment we thought of as autonomy, but actually when speaking with students and staff, particularly the students, they're actually we connect empowerment a lot more than autonomy. Autonomy feels lonely, and that's not what we associate with belonging. But I think for me, I think what helped me find a kind of a sense of belonging at university, for example, was actually when I kind of let go of what I was kind of fed as what university was, in terms of, when I go to university, I'm going to find loads of friends. I'm going to be able to join all these sports and societies. I'm going to make, I'm going to have I guess when I kind of let go of that kind of prescriptive kind of sense of what I perceive to be, this is what you're going to expect at higher education, this is what you're going to get from university. When I kind of actually followed what I was interested in, and then made connections through those interests and through those different projects or different spaces, that's when I think I found a sense of belonging. I think also just from learning about myself as well, because I think you can neglect and realize that, actually, you are always learning about yourself, and actually what you need differs at different time points. So I think when I kind of took the pressure off is when I kind of felt a bit more sense of belonging. But also what really, really impacted me was academic support. When I didn't have academic support, I didn't understand I was dyslexic, those things, I didn't feel like I belonged, because I was I'm just failing. I didn't understand why Warwick had accepted me. I just felt so stupid. So then when things like that slotted into place, it's okay, no, you know what, I can navigate this space place. So yeah, I think it is a very personal thing.
No, it was very good to share. Thank you so much, Inka. Thank you for sharing. And Tom, I hand it over to you too. I don't need an official definition, just what you mean by that.
I think so I'm a historian by background, and I think I take a bit of a different thought on where this issue of belonging has come from. And I think it probably has always existed, but the way that higher education has changed in the last 30 years, I think, has led to this focus on well-being, on mental health, on belonging. And if you look back to Tony Blair's government, the Deering report, wanting to get 50% of people into higher education. To get 50% of people in higher education, you're going to have, by definition, a lot more people with a lot broader experiences. You're going to have a lot more WP students, wider participation. And my perspective, I think, is that that experience of higher education has then been diffracted into all these different ways of engaging with different classes and opportunities that there are at university. And what we've seen as a result of that is the number of students with part-time jobs has gone up, the number of students coming in from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So you've got, a huge increase in wider participation, in estranged students, in students coming from overseas. And all of that leads to more challenges to feeling like you belong. If you compare it to the generation that my parents were part of, my parents didn't go to university, but the generation they were part of would have been much more almost homogeneous, would have been the same type of people with the same experiences. And because university didn't come with loans, because it didn't come with the same pressure, I would say, that students have now, or expectation that everyone gets a first, which by definition we can't do. I think that pressure is keenly felt by students now. And 2012, you mentioned, was that piece of research. Obviously in the UK, that's when we got the increase in 9K fees. That's put a huge amount of extra pressure on students now, where I resat a year of my degree. I changed in year 2 and went back into year 2 again in a different subject, because I thought, well, I want to change from psychology to history. Whereas I don't know if I could do that today because of the amount of money that goes with it. And I think, and I'm massively simplifying it, but I think those issues can have quite a large impact on one's sense of self, one's sense of identity. And because of that, for want of a better term, commodification of higher education, there is pressure to belong. There is pressure to be in societies, sports clubs. You have to volunteer. You have to be building your employability. Day one, when students join, we talk to them about graduate outcomes and the job that they're going to get in 3 years' time, when they're probably thinking, I don't even know where the toilets are, and we're already saying to them, you need to be this person and university will change you. And I think all of that puts so much pressure on students to perhaps be something that they're maybe not, that it can lead them to act in inauthentic ways. It can lead to, the opposite of all the phrases that Inka was saying. So connection, inclusion, empowerment. They can feel very disempowered. They can feel like they can feel excluded. They can feel very othered, I think, as well. And so that's why I think the work that we and many others are doing in the space around trying to get students to feel like they belong is back in the vogue, or something we speak about more, because we're seeing this challenge of universities where you can't have dropout rates that are increasing. And there is that clear link between a sense of belonging and student success. And so it's seen as, if we can help students feel like they belong, if we can give them that sense of empowerment, and agency, and however else we're describing it and defining it, then we as a sector will survive, for want of a better term. And so I think I'm always very cautious. Although we've done a lot of work on belonging, I am very, very aware that it feeds into that commodified system of higher education that just tries to keep students there because universities need tuition fees.
But I guess I was like, just what you just said, Tommy, like it touched upon how our student population has diversified massively, but have our systems. And so it's like, it's making sure, it's like, okay, yeah, like we know, we can see, we research, there's so much research relating belonging and student success, but it is kind of that there is such a bigger piece around, okay, yeah, we know our student population has diversified, are our systems reflecting and supporting the students and staff we are wanting in higher education, and not just, well, exactly, yeah, so it's like there's such a big piece around this, isn't there? And I think
part of the, sorry to jump in, I think part of the challenge is as well that if you think of education generally as a pyramid with kind of professors and those holding PhDs at the top in the smallest sector, because, and this is just experience of teaching and working with academics in many different universities, the people who are working to deliver modules in the majority of cases, but not in all cases, their primary motivation generally is about research. And so teaching is a secondary thing they do, that they are fulfilling their workload model. And I appreciate there are teaching focused institutions and there are small and specialists, but just from my experience of the few I've worked at, and what that means is that for staff thinking just in an instrumental way, their promotion is not based on how good a teacher they are. Their promotion is based on the research output. So teaching becomes secondary. So this is where we see courses that are designed, as Inka said, that are designed or were designed 15, 20 years ago that have never been updated. You know, and I think that can lead to some of these challenges that come with almost broken systems where, and actually there's a really interesting set of examples. If you look at independent higher education providers, so you're more small and specialists, they have a completely different way of delivering content where there are, and I've seen one or two where they deliver the same content on 3 different occasions throughout the week. And if you miss the first one, they'll call you to come to the second. Whereas we put in mainstream education where we are, there's so much pressure that you will attend between 9 and 10 on that Monday morning or Tuesday morning or whatever. And we see students that go, well, I can't make that for reasons because there's more students, I now have to live further away, but the buses haven't been fixed to get me onto campus in time. Like really simple hygiene factors that students have to face that as a sector and as a group of staff who work in this space, we don't encounter that on a daily basis. Just really practically, we don't encounter. I drive to work. So for me, I'm very privileged to be able to drive to work, that I don't have those same challenges of waiting 30 minutes for a bus and then the bus is full. And do you see what I mean? And all of this feeds into a student's sense of belonging. And I think that part of the challenge, I think, with staff who work and teach in higher education, and I say that as one of them, is that we base it on our experiences of 20, 30, however many years ago. And I sometimes see a little bit of an attitude of, well, it didn't do me any harm to have to do X number of hours per week and do all of this stuff, not recognizing that students are under much more pressure. There is a much higher set of expectations because of the amount of money, but also that some students coming into university, because of this diversification, which is brilliant, by the way, we need more diverse ideas in university. And again, I say this as a clearing student and all that sort of stuff. We are seeing that Inka's right, the system isn't reacting to those students. And so everyone's having to fit through a very kind of narrow square hole when no one is that shape anymore, even the students that used to fit it because of the challenges. And so all of that leads to this sense of othering, all of that leads to disengagement. And at least in the course that in the department that I work in chemistry, if you miss a bit of time because you're sick or because you have to work, it's very, very difficult then to catch up. And so it spirals for students. And so almost belonging is, again, I think belonging is an outcome of the success of, or the lack of belonging that students feel is an outcome of the success of higher education, where products are now sold to students. It's not so much the experience anymore. And we see 10-week waits for counselling support. Well, 10 weeks is a term. So if you're waiting 10 weeks, then you're probably going to drop out, you're going to go. And I think all of that feeds into this lack of belonging that students can feel. And actually, we're talking about students, staff don't feel like they belong as well. And I think there's a really key element there, that the system affects staff in the same way as students. And when we talk about the work we do around belonging with staff, in the student context, how can you make students feel like they belong? Staff regularly say, how can I make students feel like they belong if I don't feel like I belong? Yeah, and I think that is a real challenge that perhaps needs to be focused on more, that you staff have to feel empowered. They have to feel like they belong in order for it to work in the classroom.
Yeah, very, very good points. And so how far do you think, you mentioned that some institutions are better at that, others, and the whole education system higher education system is probably not yet there. How far is it? What can you see, as much as you can see, obviously, with the other institutions, or generally, what do you think, Tom, about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you mentioned at the beginning that I'm a Fulbright scholar and I'm going away to the States in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to a university in North Carolina, and I'm working with some institutions there. And Inka and I spend a lot of time when talking about belonging, about sense of identity, and that is a key part of belonging as well. So there's belonging, mattering, and identity, and they're not synonyms, but they're fairly close in terms of how students experience them. Students don't sit there and go, oh, I feel like I belong, but I don't matter. It's kind of all one thing. Looking at American universities, and I appreciate it's a very different system. They pay a huge amount more money, and there are different sets of expectations with that. The sense of identity that I've seen with the universities I work with is so much higher. And there is such a clear sense of what these institutions are that I don't necessarily see reflected in UK institutions outside perhaps of Oxford and Cambridge, that very clearly know what they are, and they're unashamedly that. I think particularly within the Russell Group, and I've worked in universities in all the different groups, but in the Russell Group, there is such a fear sometimes about leading, because if you make a mistake, then, and having that identity that's different. So everyone's approach is just all regress to the norm, all be that group in the middle who, for want of a better term, by not being bold, by not building an identity for students, by building a brand that students can't use, for example, on their merchandise, so they can't come to university with the university on their hoodie because they're not allowed to, that doesn't build that sense of identity. It doesn't build that confidence that students can have. And I think, to answer your question, there are other examples as well that we've seen in Australian universities. So some of the partners we work with there, where there is a greater sense of belonging because of the focus put on what does the university mean to students. Whereas I think in the UK, we're definitely not there yet, but we're not there yet, at least in my experience, of identity and how students relate to their studies. So students have, in my experience, students have a really good sense of belonging to their academic department. So students will say, I'm a chemist, but students won't necessarily say, I am a University of Warwick student in my context. And that's something they have to build separately. Whereas if I look at Elon University, which is where I'm going in North Carolina, they are Elon first, then they're their department. So they all wear
the identity of the university. Yeah.
Yes. And that doesn't just last while they're at university. That sense of belonging goes years beyond in terms of being an alumni. And so they have homecoming days where people from 40, 50, 60 years ago still come back and spend time at the university. Whereas we don't have that. We don't have that today in the same way.
Okay. And Inga, I'm coming to you. Just one question, it's more personal, Tom, but will you also research that as part of your scholarship, belonging, or it's completely different?
No, yeah, it's a great question. So yes, that's the plan. So Inka and myself, in the work we're doing, we've done some very specific Warwick work that we can perhaps touch on a little bit later on, but we're looking more broadly at the sector. And my time at Elon, I'm there for the next 10 months, is looking at factors that feed into belonging. And the focus I'm actually going to have is the impact and role of AI in that space as well. And the emergence of AI and how the integration of that into curriculum is both positive and negative. So,
so if you come back, we'll invite you back to the show.
Thank you.
That's okay. No, thank you for being here. And I'm going to Inka. But before that, thank you everybody who follows us live, almost 50 people. Thank you very much. Please add comments and share your questions, and we welcome your opinion as well. And Inka, please react. You wanted to say something. Sorry, I just stopped you because I had a question. I don't know. Please pick up on that, and then I will have a question as well.
No, that's okay. You can shoot your question because, to be quite honest, I've forgotten my point at this point.
So
you shoot your question, I might remember.
I should have stopped you once you had it in your mind. I wanted to ask you about, because the previous time you were on our show, you mentioned that you also went through some difficult times previously in higher education. I'm just talking about it because you already mentioned. So did you have also some bad experience when student belonging was not really catered for? And what were those bad experiences? And how much you see it as, and from your point of view, having seen a few examples, how well overall it is. This is a thing in the higher education in the UK, and how much it is done right.
Well, so when I came into university, I was straight away identified as a widening participation student. I didn't want anything to do with that label. I just wanted to fit in, and I felt like I just wanted to ignore and just not associate with any labels, because that just made me stand out, and I didn't want that. And I think I kind of wish that I had been more confident and just kind of gone along to things and engaged in that space, because I realized those people were only there to try and support me. But I think I was like, I just don't want to stand out. I don't want anything to do with any labels, and yeah, I just didn't really know how to navigate that space, and then it was only I was failing assignments in my first year, and I just didn't like some things I was doing really well on, others, like the majority, like essays and things, which was the majority of the psychology course. So like essays, reports, I was failing, really struggling to engage with, didn't understand why I was struggling so much. I've always kind of worked hard or worked too hard, is what I've heard. But yeah, so I just didn't understand why Warwick said yes. I just thought I was really, really stupid. And I really, really considered that just dropping out, because I was like, I just clearly don't belong here. Yeah, because I mean, like, you'd sit in a lecture hall and people are like, oh yes, it's just like, this is fine, like, you know, and it's like can't even remember the last sentence that the lecturer said. I'm desperately trying to take notes and this is just going nowhere. It was then literally in a chance conversation with a counsellor that they were like, oh, have you been diagnosed with dyslexia? And I was like, no. They're like, okay, we think you should maybe be assessed. I was like, okay. So they supported me through the process, which was really, really great. I had a really good experience. And actually, I've always had a really good experience with wellbeing at Warwick. Like they do some really great things of like you can literally just drop in, and it might mean that you have to wait half an hour for an appointment or something, but you can have like a drop-in appointment. You can't necessarily have 6 weeks of counselling then and there, but you can have like a drop-in appointment, which sometimes that's all you need as student or staff. Like, I mean, from a student perspective, sometimes that's all you need is to be able to go, oh, I'm really stressed, or I've had this, or I'm really worried about a friend or whatever, and to be able to like to speak about it in kind of a safe space. But yeah, it was when and I think also when coming into university, I was a couple of years older than like the typical. So I was 20, about to turn 21, which I realize isn't old, but when you're surrounded by fresh 18-year-olds and everyone's like, oh, this chicken's pink, am I going to get salmonella? It's a bit like, oh, okay, I don't fit into this bracket either. So yeah, I kind of struggle with sense of belonging in those kind of different ways. And I think also coming into university, I'd had a difficult time in A-levels where I had to have a year out, and so I was worried about that happening again and having to take and not wanting to have to take a year out. So I would pick and choose kind of societies that I thought might help me kind of manage time, manage like myself a bit better, but they just weren't spaces that I felt like I could connect with people. And so yeah, there was lots of things feeding into that sense of othering, sense of just like struggling to find a sense of belonging. And it was when I think really for me like a real game changer was when I changed personal tutor, who was a lead on academic support, and who really worked with me to literally to go into the very like basics, nitty gritty of, right, Inka, let's sit down and actually look at your feedback. And okay, right, you know what? This is how you tell a story in an essay. It's like, oh, okay, because otherwise my brain would get really excited, go on all sorts of different tangents. I understood, obviously, no one else could. So that didn't really work well for the marker. Worked well. I mean, it didn't work well for me either because I was failing. But that was like, and then COVID hit. So COVID, like I think I said, like the last when I was here first time, COVID helped me massively because I could pause lectures. But it was really weird coming back to face, and I had such a panic coming to face because it's like, but I've actually found this is my way of working well. And then to go back to face, I just thought, oh my word, I'm going to slip back into failing all over again. And yeah, so but it was really like a key moment that I will never forget is how I was like, why do people know my name? Like everyone in the seminar is like, oh, hi, Inka, and I'm like, who are you? But then I realized that I was that weird person who had their camera on the whole time. They didn't, so they knew what I looked like. I didn't know what they looked like, so that was a bit of a weird moment. But yeah, so like there's been a few things that kind of, I think particularly in undergrad, I think it was very different when I came into my master's. Like I knew coming into my master's, my caring responsibilities were my priority. I knew that I already knew Warwick. I already had some connections there in terms of staff and projects that I'd worked on in the time between my undergrad and my master's. So I already kind of had, I guess, a foundation that I was then building on, which is a very, very different proposition to coming into undergrad, struggling and failing and not really knowing anyone. So yeah, but yeah, so it's been interesting, but I think...
Well, thank you, Inka. Thank you. And I love to have the student voice. Thank you, because you really share the real stuff and you really share like even the labeling, like we mentioned so many times, the widening participation, major students, this one. How does it feel when you're actually part of that group and you just don't want to be called a major student or widening participation student? It's a label already that you're different. And I like that. And you're talking about your imposter syndrome and all that stuff. So really, really good that you share. Tom, you wanted to ask something because you're unmuted? Just on this?
No, it was just to really follow on from what Inka said. And I think you've articulated really well some of the challenges that we have with student sense of belonging, where it was when you change personal tutor and it relies so much on individuals and their approach, which I think if I reflect on the personal tutoring systems that all universities will have, they are very much focused in the majority of universities on the academic context only. And yes, some will support students beyond that and be able to signpost them and direct them. But I think there are some colleagues who are very steadfast in, no, I'm here to talk about the work only. I'm here for 1 hour and that's that. And unfortunately, I think it ends up being a little bit luck of the draw with students, because if you get a good personal, and I've heard my students say this, if you get a good personal tutor, it's easier, because you have someone who understands the context, you have someone who gets the situation. And I think, kind of stepping back to what we were talking about beforehand, I think this growth in the number of students at university, so we're over 50% now, which was obviously Tony Blair's aim. I think, reflecting on my experience, I went to university in 2007. My parents didn't go to university, so I went through clearing. I had no idea what that process was. No one had ever explained it. But then I also lacked the kind of cultural, social capital, and actually economic capital. But I couldn't afford to join all the societies I wanted to. I didn't know I didn't know what a lecture theatre was. We couldn't afford to go and see universities on open days, and so I'd never been to a university before my first day. And I picked a university, and I will happily share this because I saw a picture of a lecture theatre and thought that looked nice, which is a really, not useful way to perhaps judge where you're going to study for 3 or 4 years. And what I wonder is, with this increase to about 50% where we are now, my sense is that the next generation of students who go, so I don't have children, but my children, if you see what I mean, there'll be a much higher proportion of the population that did go to university to be able to help their children understand. Whereas I think the students who are joining us now are perhaps at the tail end of that generation who perhaps didn't go to university in such higher number. Mm-hmm. And so they don't have that capital to understand that you can come in and go and knock on someone's door and ask for support. Mm-hmm. You can come in and do this. And I don't know, that's just speculation, but I feel like if I think about the way I speak to my students compared to the advice and support that I got when I joined, it's changing. There are more people who understand the challenges of one participation students, of clearing students, of the kind of variety that we have. And I think, Inka, you nailed it as well when you said about lecture capture. So I hear too many arguments from staff saying lecture capture makes students lazy. It might do. It might make 5% of students lazy, but it helps the other 25% who...
I love it.
Who need the extra support, who need to be able to pause, who need to be able to rewind and watch again. And I think that comes back to slightly what I said about it didn't hurt me. So therefore, I didn't have that when I was, this is what I hear from colleagues. Well, I didn't have lecture capture. I just went to everything. It's like, cool, but you didn't have a job because you didn't need a grant. And it's helping people empathize. And sorry, the key word, I think, and I'll shut up after this, the key word is empathy. And as a sector, we lack empathy for the students that we work with sometimes. And we all fail at this all the time, but that for me, if you can empathize with that student experience, genuinely empathize and put your own preconceived ideas of what it's like to be a student today aside, because I still feel like yesterday I was a student, but it was nearly 20 years ago, which is terrifying. So, we have to reflect and think more about what does the system look like for people coming in. Sorry, Inka, I'll be quiet. You go.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like my response would be, so? Like, in terms, like, it's like, oh, but I didn't need that when I was going to university. My response would be like, what's your point? Like, just because you didn't need it in that time doesn't mean that people don't need it now, or actually that people at that time didn't need it. It's just maybe the technology wasn't there, or they actually ended up dropping out because they couldn't stay. Like, it's just like, okay, so times move on. Like, we need to move forward and listen to what people are saying. That would be my response.
That's a good point. It's a good point. And we will go to some examples on how to do it. But before that, I just would like to thank our partner, Chalk and Talk podcast. So if you're looking for another great education podcast other than Teachers Talk Radio, check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stocky. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based math education for students of all ages. And on her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching math facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on top-notch guests, like we do, educators, researchers, and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. So Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education, and you can find it on your favorite podcast platforms. And now we are going back to our show. It's the Tuesday Twilight Show, every second Tuesday on Teachers Talk Radio, where we discuss a hot topic in higher education. And today we discuss student belonging with my fantastic and brilliant returning guest, actually, Dr. Tom Ricci and Inka Heider-Wright, who also represents the student voice, which is really important in our show. And now I'd like to ask you about, we've talked about what student belonging is, and very good points there, where the UK system is now, and how a little bit of, like, Tom, you brought some perspectives in the US, where you are very soon moving to research the topic and bring back what you've learned. Let's talk now a bit about how to do it, actually, because let's be fair, universities have advanced a bit since I attended, because at least you have personal tutors, you have well-being support, you have counseling. In some ways, sometimes it's just an app, or you have the actual department. You have social events organized, you have student support. So there are some bits and pieces in place. We cannot say that it's exactly the same as 20 or 30 years ago. There's still a lot to be done. But you also have a project that actually won an award, the Collaborative Award for Teaching Excellence by Advance AG. So let's talk a bit about, obviously, give some tips on how to do it in a more complex way, and not just the bits and pieces.
Yeah, so the project is called We Are Chemistry, and it's one that we set up in 2022. And I joined the department in April, and we launched it in the October. And it was in response to just coming out of the COVID restrictions. We were just in the final kind of few months of that at that point. And there was a feeling in the department, as well as other universities, that students would struggle to transition back to being in person, which, I mean, we've all faced that challenge, and Inka was just talking about it as well. And so we were keen to think about, how do we, if we're going to do something that's student-led and in partnership with students, how do we do something that's not co-creation washing, or, you know, basically, how do we make sure if we're doing this, it's genuine, and we get students at the center of the work? And so we started really simply by, we looked at NSS feedback, National Student Survey feedback, and we looked at students' comments in the department for challenges that they were having. But we found, when we were looking at that, when I say we, it's me and my colleague, Adam Alcock, who works at the University of Warwick still, we sat there and basically said, this is great, but if you just look at this data, you're only hearing from students who've got through the system. And so we were really keen to understand the experience of those who dropped out, because if you want to improve the system for all students, if you can fix it, if you can fix the barriers that stop those students who have dropped out, it's the rising tide lifts all ships analogy. And so we reached out to students who were on temporary and permanent withdrawal. We conducted essentially exit interviews with them. We paid them for their time. And we just spent an hour and a half talking to as many students as we could. And we still do it now. And the purpose is to understand what went wrong for them. What was the moment that caused them to leave? And if we can do something to undo that, what would that be? And so we spent, as I say, a lot of that summer speaking to students. And what became very clear was that, I think I went into that expecting them to have like laundry lists of problems, but it was usually one or two things that had been the reason that they had dropped out or gone on temporary withdrawal. And one of the key ones was around communication, which is not going to be, you know, that's not unique. We all struggle to communicate with our students. But actually, we then said to them, well, but what would begin to make this better? And they said, well, things that are delivered by students for students, but not in a way that is pandering, not just saying that we're doing this with students, but actually having students at the core of what we're doing. And so Adam and I reflected. Adam works on professional services. I'm kind of split academic and professional services. And we said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we want to get students involved from the outset. So we recruited for a student and said, please come in and, you know, we'll work with us. You'll be a partner. We have kind of equal grounding that we'll work on. We're going to be paying you for your time. And we want you to work with us to genuinely co-create. So we explore what co-creation is in relation to consultation and co-production. And we began to work out, how can we work together in a way that we develop a program of activities for students, as you mentioned, and a program of support that's not me as a, 32, 33 at the time, not me assuming from my experience what's best for students, but actually working with students who are going through this. And so the We Are Chemistry model essentially does that. You know, we spent a lot of that time speaking to students, and they were sharing with us that Why would I come in for an activity on a Wednesday afternoon if it's of no value to me? Why would I come in for that? Because it's quite high risk to come in and tell people how I'm feeling who I don't know. And what came through the discussions was that students were struggling with what they felt was a lack of trust sometimes when we were asking them to come and engage with different activities and events in the department. And so we focused on building as much trust as we could with them. We did that by showing up, by being consistent, by even considering power dynamics down to, you mentioned obviously Dr. Tom Ritchie, that's very kind, but I'm never that to students. I'm Tom, I'm a person, the rest of it doesn't really matter. The rest of it is a thing I did once that allows me to have this job, and it's just not important. And so we worked really hard with that initially with them. We then spent time, the model basically was have high value, low risk events for students. So don't expect them to come into like a wellbeing Wednesday, because they won't do it, because they don't know who the person is that they're talking to. And I wouldn't share how I feel to a random person. So I shouldn't expect a student to do that. In terms of the activities and events, we adopted something called an interest-based model, where rather than saying to students, you need to be involved the whole year with us because we know students are time poor, we said, okay, come and work with us on a project that you're interested in. We'll support you. We'll give you the resource, the guidance, the mentoring, whatever you need to run the activity, the intervention, whatever it would be. And then when you're done, you can go back to your studies and we won't bother you. And I think that came from my experience of working in students' unions, where you tend to have quite bad breadth in terms of student engagement, but quite a lot of depth. So you'll find your 4 or 5 students and you keep going back to them again and again and again. And we were finding that if we did that in chemistry, then students would burn out and they would go off, quite rightly, because they have other things to do. And so practically, we started very, very slow. We have events every Wednesday between 1 and 3, and these range from academic support through to well-being, through to we did a careers activity, but rather than saying, come and, we'll tell you how to get a job, why would a student come in on a Wednesday? What's the value? We did LinkedIn headshots. And so we said, we'll offer you free professional headshots. And while they're queuing, we would talk to them about their careers and we would help them with their LinkedIn profiles. And basically recognizing that students are time poor and that whilst we can't give them money, we can always try to feed them. We can always try to give them something, for want of a better term, but not unintentionally. I think the key part of this, because none of this is novel, people will be doing this at institutions across the piece, but it was an intentional piece of work that we did, that because of my role in academic and non-academic, I was able to integrate it into the curriculum. So students, it wasn't separate. You didn't have your learning here and your extracurricular here. They were part of the same thing. And the best example I can share, and then I'll start talking about it, is at Warwick we have something called the Undergraduate Research Support Scheme, which undergraduate students can apply to do a 6 to 10 week research project over the summer break, and they get £1,500 to do that. Great. It's a very popular scheme. Lots of students do it. Chemistry, we were finding, wasn't doing that well in terms of applications and conversions to students who were selected. And so we very consciously said, okay, we sat down with students. We said, what are the main barriers for this? And they said, well, we don't know about it early enough. We don't have the support to write the application. We don't know where to find supervisors, and we're not sure what to do even then. And so we started to build the program within We Are Chemistry and a first year module that I teach. So we would have people come in and speak in the module on the Monday, and then we'd have the support on the Wednesday. So students would know what's coming, and we would make sure it was communicated to them. And by doing it that way, you're not doing the thing that I see more in higher education than anywhere else, where people go, well, we ran an event and no one came. And you kind of go, okay, but did you tell anyone? And they go, well, we sent an email. It's like, cool. But no one I don't read all my emails, so let alone students reading theirs. And what we found with this URSS approach is it meant that I could talk about it to them in context in class, where we know of all the things we expect students to do, students will prioritize being in class. They won't necessarily always be able to prioritize the extra things. And then it meant on the Wednesday afternoon, when some would come, they would now know what the opportunity is. They would now know, they would have an idea because they've heard about it. And then we could talk a little bit more about the application process, and we could put them in touch with supervisors, because I can use my knowledge of the department at that point. And what it led to, in the first year that we did it, we saw an increase of, I think, 59% engaged with it in terms of applications. And then this year, again, on top of that, we've had another 62% increase again, because students are aware of it. And we're seeing it so much more in first year students. And on their module approval, on their URSS feedback, they're saying, we learned about this through the Beyond Science module in year 1, and the We Are Chemistry program. And so it's great to see that students are learning through these kind of very intentional interventions. So it's not just doing activities for the sake of doing them. It's doing them to build that sense of trust early on, to help them know that when things go bad, they know they can come and have a chat with me or Adam or my colleague Reese, who's now in the role as well. And then once we've built that trust, we can then start to apply those interventions to academic contexts and to other extracurricular contexts as well. And then it also means when things go wrong, so if there are issues, in the year we went back to in-person exams, students were not particularly happy and they wanted us to kind of reconsider and reflect on that. And rather than it being something where the department would just say, no, that's not happening, because we had that trust with our staff student liaison committee, because we built all of those relationships through this program, it meant that we empowered our SSLC chair to lead a review, to work with our director of education, and they were working in genuine partnership. It wasn't tokenistic. It wasn't consultation disguised as co-creation. It was actual working in student partnership. And that, I think, all the principles of that are what we've brought into the belonging framework that Inka and I now work on as well. I realize that's a lot of context on We Are Chemistry, but that approach to working with students, that kind of intentionality and that focus on what's genuinely good for students. And for context, we didn't really have a lot of money. This wasn't like we were throwing 50, 60, 70,000 at this. We had a few thousand in the first year, which I appreciate is a lot of money depending on what university you're in. But we stretched that a long way by working with students and getting them to help us lead the way, essentially.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. And actually, I'd like to share congratulations from the audience. Joe McShane, completely agree on the communication issue. Congratulations on such a jump in your student engagement. Thank you, Joe, for sharing these nice words.
Just to jump back in, Tamira, as well. Just Joe, just to reply to that comment. Sorry, I mentioned about we had a student who we brought in for communication. We didn't just get them to run our social media channels. We got them to write our comms plan, and they told us all the things that we were doing wrong. We gave them the tools that they needed. So we bought them the social media management tools. We bought I think £20 for the, £60 or something for the year. And just on that communication with social media, the moment that we stopped trying to do it and we gave it to a student who we, again, built that trust with, we worked with them, we saw in just year one, the engagement from students went up by sort of 2,000% in terms of through those platforms, in terms of views, likes, comments, messages. And that cost us, paying that student and paying for that tool probably cost us less than £1,000 for the year. And the kind of cost benefit of that was huge by doing something that was just very, very intentional, by working with Jess, who was the student that we worked with at the time, and by supporting her to lead on that work. And actually, bearing in mind Jess was a chemist, she now is a social media manager for a massive organization in London, because she leveraged that into her graduate, graduate role. And so I think that sort of thing, it doesn't always have to cost huge amounts of money. It's just about the relationships that people can have and doing simple things right sometimes. I think that's a real thing that we miss with communication, and it's not always the fault of staff. We're busy, we've got too many things to do, and it's easy to put things in a newsletter. But by just putting that bit of extra time and thought sometimes into things, and working with students who go, do you know what, don't go on Facebook anymore because no one's on there, actually go here and use this or use that platform, that sort of thing can really transform. And I know lots of institutions are doing it now, but that can really transform the way in which we engage with students as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for the comment. We have 65 people now, 66 watching us, and please share your comments, questions, and also compliments, because it's really great. And thank you, Tom. Inka, from your point of view as a student, obviously, and I really would like to touch on this communication. I think Thomas is brilliant, because we do a lot of things at universities that students just don't have access to, because these are communicated in emails, mostly on their student emails, the university emails. They might not check every day, even less so than their personal ones. And then attendance is not high at these events. You're right, Tom, and this was a very, very good way of solving it. So Inka, if you could now also talk about it from the student point of view.
Yeah, I think intentionality, consistency, and building into what is already existing. So like the curriculum, or you already know that students are going to be on campus at that time, or like working with them to timetable things as well. Because I remember during my master's, there was an opportunity to go to a talk about PhDs. I only found out about it an hour before it was hosted on campus in an evening. And it's like, well, funnily enough, I live like an hour away from campus. I'm caring for my mum. I'm not going to make it. And it was just a real shame, because it's like, otherwise I would actually really love to like be able to access that information and ask questions and engage. But it's like, well, poor communication. I didn't know about it until an hour beforehand, and the rush email was sent out. And it's like, who are you really going to be able to engage with that? Would it actually be better to reschedule and do this, or do it online and record it and share it with your students, and make sure it reaches them, and say that you're maybe around this is, you know, you got an hour during the week, like drop in if you've got any questions or email any questions. But yeah, I think intentionality, consistency, and building into what already exists is really important. Also links back to something that you said earlier, Tamia, in terms of like there's another thing and another thing and another thing. Like there's so many things, which is brilliant, but it also adds to the overwhelm and adds to that pressure of, oh my word, there's so many things. What do I actually engage with, or what do I need to engage with in order to achieve X, Y, and Z? Because I think it's lovely that staff and students want to put on things, but like Tom said, if actually it's kind of a one-off and you go, oh, well, students haven't attended, it might actually be because there isn't that trust there, or they don't know about it. And it's like, actually, maybe it needs to be put on at a different time and communicated a little bit differently. So I think, although maybe that sounds quite complex, it really does come down to almost those really basic things of just considering, like even if you start by going, hey, you know what would help me to attend this, and thinking about that. If, say, for example, you can't go and do a focus group, but thinking what would help you to attend it, like, and if you think, oh yeah, I could attend it, still test it. I'd still say, hey, like, I'm thinking about doing this, would this be of interest? And you can always ask them like to put on a WhatsApp group chat. There's always a group chat. Like there is always a group chat. And I asked some of the student officers the other day at the Students' Union about a session that I needed them to attend, and just went, look, this is the time it's on. Could you just pop this to the group and just say, would this work? I know your calendars are getting more and more full. And they said, is that okay if I leave it with you? They're like, yeah. And they got back to me within a couple of hours and like, look, this is our availability. I was like, brilliant. Okay, I'll work with that. So, you know, these things are possible, I think. And sometimes it can slow a process down a little bit, but ultimately what you're doing will be better, and it'll be a lot more impactful, not just for the students, but also for you. And as Tom said with Jess, like the outcome, it's not just, oh, the department benefits or those very few students benefit, but actually long term, there are really massive long term benefits. And like as a student who has then eventually been able to engage, and who has eventually been able to feel that kind of sense of belonging, it's like, well, if I didn't feel that sense of belonging, I wouldn't have applied for the Warwick Graduate Scheme. I wouldn't still be here doing the work. Yeah, so there is real long-term impact for a sense of belonging, for actually doing those little things of that intentionality, that consistency, and just building that trust. And I think a lot of it does come down to that trust in terms of, yeah, you know what, okay, we've got this project funding, and we've got this idea, but what do you think? And providing that space to actually get those questions, get those ideas, and be like, you know what, actually, realistically, we're not going to be able to achieve that in this time frame, but I really love this idea, and I wonder if we can incorporate it in this way and this way. And I think having that kind of openness as well is really important. So yeah, those are kind of things that stand out to me from my own experience as a student and also as new staff. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing. And I don't know, Tom, if you want to react to this, we have some more questions.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to say, I think trust is everything. I think trust is the thing that we are. Trust between staff, between students and staff, and between students themselves is trust and empathy. They're the ones, and anything you can do to build that trust is going to benefit. And just to Inka's point, I mentioned about Jess. Actually working with Jess in her new role, they now come to our careers fairs and she comes back. And so actually that small investment of working with Jess has had a profound impact. And it helps us in so many other spaces when we've had curriculum review where, you know, not everywhere, but I know some colleagues who, when they do their work in this space, they have to beg students to come, and they might have one or two in the room. We have to keep students out of the room because we're full, because we have so many who want to come and talk to us, because they know they trust, again, they trust us. They know that we're not going to shout at them, laugh at them, mock them, undermine them. We're there to hear what they need to say. And I think that's such a crucial part of any kind of student working, student co-creation. The last thing I'll say as well, and Inka, you alluded to it, but it's about, for me, recognizing that privilege when you are doing work with students, that you don't go, okay, we have this pot of money, we want to work with you in a very transactional way, but actually it's recognizing that even by having that pot of money, and Inka knows the project I'm talking about, that can change how students engage with you. So you need to be very, very, very aware and very clear early on about the impact that even being the funder can have, where everyone then waits for you to talk. We found that when we work with students as well. And there's a great bit of work that I'll just allude to so people can look it up. It's by something called the Co-Production Collective and the Evaluation Exchange. And they've spent a lot of time looking at evaluating student partnership and evaluating co-production, co-design. And really, really interesting. Google it, have a look. We have a project on there called Get Warwick Talking, which was, we took this idea of student partnership and tried to push it to its limits about how far can we take this in terms of this equal partnership for equal benefit approach. And we found some really interesting stuff. And there are some incredible examples as well from others that I'd recommend.
Yeah, thank you. We will read it. And I have some questions. We all have almost 70 listeners and viewers, so please share any questions you might have. And if you want to meet Teachers Talk Radio in person, you can now do it at at our festival that we'll have later on, the Teachers Talk Humanities. If you are in history or religious education, like Tom, you're also invited. If you're not in the US yet, in the 20th of September in Manchester, where you're invited to meet, and this is for free. And now I would like to have my questions going forward. If you're talking about student belonging, for those of you who just joined later, and this is the Tuesday Twilight Show at Teachers Talk Radio and student belonging in higher education. And we have two excellent experts, Dr. Tom Ricci and Inka Hyde-Wright, who is representing the student voice from University of Warwick. And they also shared what they did, but also more broader, how it is happening in the industry. And my question about involving students as partners, how you make sure that when a student is sharing their opinion, it's not just their personal isolated opinion, and it really represents a bigger group. And we've seen this with class representatives, which I think all universities have, and at some point you're meeting class representatives and you really want to work together with them. And sometimes you find that they didn't really actually looked at the wider group to have a real representative opinion. It's mainly their opinion or their friend's opinion. How you make sure that they are really, you talked about it, really, to make sure that they are engaged and they really think about it. And sometimes we've also seen this, that culturally, in some cultures, they don't share with you anything they don't like. They're more into the kind of like aligning with what is already dictated. But probably that's easier to solve. I'm really talking about is how you make sure that it's representative. That would be one question. And the other, probably I go to the other later, because otherwise it's hard to answer. So yeah, how do you make sure that it's represented, that there's representation?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, and I'm academic convener for our SSLC, and so we've had this question come up a lot. And a couple of things I think that we've tried to do. First of all, do we ever tell students actually how to do this stuff? Do we tell them how to go and engage other students, or do we just expect that they know? And do we explain why? The why is really important. If you just say, go and ask students, they're like, but I know because it's my experience. But actually being able to explain to them why it's important, and what we've tried to do is give them the tools as well. So we've set our students up with Vevox accounts so they can do things at the end of lectures. We encourage them to use Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, whatever works for them. But we've explained what advocacy is. We've explained how to engage, and we find that whilst not perfect, it's becoming a cultural thing where if I look at our SSLC reps now, we would actively task them, and then we would review it with the chair at the following meeting. Now, it's not perfect, but we were seeing students coming in and saying, well, we put a survey out, we had 80 responses out of 100 in the year, whatever it would be, and this was the feedback. And so you're getting that personal point, but also that kind of cohort level idea. The other part of that, I would say as well, is the model that we've created in our department. So Warwick has a model of having chairs and secretaries who are students. We've moved away from that. So again, Adam and myself, and now Reese, who works in the department, we have worked to make it so that we take as much of the admin burden off of the chairs as possible. So we don't have a secretary role anymore. We have co-chair roles where two students can work together to be supported to run that meeting. We will take the minutes. We then share that with them. We go through it. We make sure it reflects what they want. But actually, we also make sure that we're communicating effectively between the meetings. And so we're not just dropping an agenda on them, and we're working with them so that they can understand why it's important for them to be pushing the other reps to get that student opinion. I also think, to your point about not all students want to give feedback, it's about diversifying the ways that we get that feedback. So not just relying on your student reps, because again, we've been talking a lot about how busy students are and actually how difficult it can be to stand up in a lecture and ask these questions. And so we have also tried to use virtual learning environments to be able to put questions up. We've piloted a product this year. I won't name it, but we piloted a product this year to see, can we do this online as well? But we also use all of the social media to do polls with our students. We have QR codes stuck up all around our department that students can click on. We haven't got it, but we're working on getting it. You may have seen these in local supermarkets where you can put a coin in a slot and then you can see which of the three things that people want you to work on. And so we've tried to think about as many different ways of getting that feedback as possible and then trying to bring that to the room. We've also done it with our module feedback as well. So we work with our year leads and our student reps to make sure that module feedback captures some of that feeling from students. And so basically, to put it simply, we try to create as many different data sources that will be useful as possible, so that students can feed in depending on where they are.
Okay, thank you very much. And Inka, to you also the same thing, and also as Tom touched upon that, students are really busy. So adding it onto your responsibilities to really attend all these meetings, and before that, talking to your peers and representing their opinions. So how it can fit into the very busy schedule of the student. We've just talked about you hardly have any time to actually catch up with your studies because you have many other things you might work apart from it and any other. And then you are also adding on to this by having to attend all these meetings and then preparing for them.
Yeah, I'll never forget. So in my undergrad, I was kind of just your average student rep, and then at the beginning of the year they were like, okay, we're also needing a communications officer, and I just straight away was like, I don't actually have capacity to do this, so I'm hoping someone else can, but I just want to put it out that I don't have capacity. No one else spoke. So at the end of the very awkward silence, I went, okay, I'll do it. And I was like, oh, okay, another thing. But it was quite interesting. So I was on the in that time I was going into my final year, but I was also put on the second year group chat to support them. And that I saw after a couple of their assignments, the group chat would go nuts. They'd go, oh my word, have you seen this feedback? Or are you struggling with this? Blah, blah, blah. And so I set up a couple of meetings with some of the second year course reps and went, would you be interested in having a chat? Because we had similar experiences. Partly because I was like, hopefully sharing experiences can support them. And actually, you know what, this particular assignment that they're having challenges with, that is actually part of the process. Like it's a difficult assignment because it makes you think differently and approach work differently. But actually that was a really important part of the learning experience. But also I wanted to have that meeting with them because I knew that otherwise our SSLC meeting was going to go over by a long way. And so it's like a bit of mitigation as well. So I think, yeah, it was another thing, but I deliberately put myself forward for being on the SSLC when going into my master's, because the thing that I really enjoyed about doing it in my undergrad was it allowed me to get to know students and staff in a different way, and also see what issues were coming up and how we might, as a collective or as individuals, work together to create solutions and actually problem solve. And so going into my master's, I was really keen and put myself forward to do that, because it meant that, I was only going to be there a year. So it meant that I could get to know the department and other students from other courses quite quickly. And I was on a course that was the first year it was running. So I felt like it was quite important to be able to represent the course and go, hey guys, what are you thinking about this? And then I could take that feedback and feed it back. And if it needs to be more urgent, I could do that. But yeah, I think it is another thing. I think it's an interesting space, and you will have some staff who they're there, but they don't really want anything to do with it. But equally, there were a few times where like students would voice things that staff have clearly heard before, and I could step in as a student and go, actually, we experienced the same thing. This is how we solved it. This is how we navigated it. And so then it'd be like, it straight away you could see the anxiety ease. And so I think having different voices, having that representation in that space is so, so important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely great points. We are slowly coming to the end. I still have questions, but I'd like to thank our partner, Harsher Learning, who is sponsoring us, and this show is brought to you in partnership with them. They are publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Check out their website for the full titles. And just coming to the last questions, actually, I asked Inka about the time commitment, but Tom, it's also time commitment for everybody, for the academics, everybody else. And we know how committed colleagues are, but we also know that a day is just 24 hours, and you also have a lot of other commitments to do. So how you make sure, because obviously it takes a lot of time, as you mentioned, you interview the students and you also make this extra activities. So how can you time manage it? Or if we think about rolling it out, fine, how can we do that? Did you ever have this issue with the time commitment?
Yeah, I mean, being completely honest, it requires you to massively overwork. It requires you to, and unfortunately that's celebrated. I'll be honest, there's a real challenge of, we celebrate staff pushing themselves too far sometimes. I understand why that's sometimes the case. Thinking about in terms of rolling it out, if I think about the belonging framework that kind of builds on a lot of this student partnership working, we've tried to come up with some really simple practical tools that staff can use, so that not every staff member has to completely bury themselves in the theory and have the experiences. And so there's a snapshot tool that we use that allows staff to audit their practices against the framework about where they currently are and where they could be. And that was developed with staff and with students through the learning circle we work on. But actually as well, we are in that space trying to leverage AI. And so there's lots of discussions around AI. I know it's what I spoke about when I came last time as well. But and there are massive questions about AI and assessment and AI and the student experience that we won't go into now. But we're trying to leverage it in the space that we're in with belonging, actually, that we have a Warwick belonging framework GPT that staff and students can use, where you can say, I am in engineering and I'm planning my welcome week events and I don't know how to help students feel like they belong, for example. Really simple question. And it will look at the training data that we've put in based on the work we've done with the framework and other examples and case studies that we've collected from staff and students. And it will help you begin to plan and think about it in a slightly different way. And it's not perfect, but it's a way of managing that overwork that sometimes comes with what we found with We Are Chemistry, which it was a program that we loved working on and we've had lots of success with, but it does require a lot of extra time and effort. And I think that's probably why we're seeing an increasing number of teaching and scholarship staff or teaching focused staff rather than teaching and research, where actually balancing that could be a problem. I think at Warwick, again, I'm conscious of talking about at Warwick, but at Warwick, we're very lucky that each department has a director of student experience who in theory is able to spend time working on this, and we have buyout to do it. The challenge comes with that, as with all roles, you have 100 hours, for instance, or you have 100% of your time, but really you have 150% of responsibilities. So for me, it's about using AI tools that we can use and working with other staff so that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel in departments. And so Where We Are Chemistry was the first of its type at Warwick, we're supporting staff to come up with their own versions tailored to their spaces. So they're not just doing We Are Life Science, they're actually doing student networks in life science as a useful example for them. And it's more about, for us, simplifying those principles that took us a long time to work out. We simplify those principles, we share them so that staff can then apply them. So they don't have to go through the 500 hours it took us of working with students, speaking to them. And I think, the belonging framework stuff, we've really tried to make that practical so that anyone can pick that up and apply it to their context straight away.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. Congratulations on the whole project and sharing it. It was really, really very insightful. And we already have now 75 listeners who are interested in the topic of student belonging in higher education, in everything you have to say, Dr. Tom Ritchie and Inka Hyder-White. So just to wrap it up, and also more generally, why do we need to focus more on student belonging and working with students in partnership? And many of the things that you've just mentioned, actually, there were really good examples of employability for the students, like as Inka mentioned, talking about helping with imposter syndrome and many of these mental health issues even helps the students, student success, retention, as you mentioned, that I think Inka mentioned you were about to drop out, but thanks to the program, you didn't. Career progression, trust, also better memories of our time at the university, that it was not simply studying. Is there anything else that I didn't mention or that you explicitly would like to say, not just with this program, but generally, why should then universities then invest time and efforts and also money into building student belonging and working with students in partnership? That would be my last wrap-up question.
Well, I guess actually, on a slightly different note, but hopefully of interest to you and all those listening now, but also when the session is put out after we finish. But Tom and I are in the process of creating a Centre for Belonging in Education. So it stretches across further and higher education. And the structure of it is that there is a policy hub, a practice hub, and a research hub. These are interconnected spaces where people interested in belonging in education can come together and, say, for example, me as a practitioner, I can tap into, okay, how can I shape policy? Because you know what? Practice can go so far, policy can go so far, research can go so far, but to make collective action and really make progress in this space and to support students and staff alike, we need to work together. And I think especially with how the sector is at the moment, it's incredibly difficult. Resources are very, very limited. And so we're really hoping, this isn't some kind of dictatorship. We want people to shape this space. So although there will be a strategy for the centre, we are very much looking for those who are wanting to lead and work in each of these spaces and work across these spaces to shape the narratives that they're wanting to pursue. And that's not to say that, okay, one project is then rolled out across the whole sector. It could still be very much institution focused or department focused, but it's a way that people can come together, build capacity and really make change. And so if that's something that people are interested in, please do get in touch with myself and Tom. We have an expression of interest form that can be shared and you can complete yourselves, share with colleagues, students and staff. We are in the process of putting in lots of funding applications to make sure that we can pay for students' time and the development of this with research projects, practice-based projects as well as policy. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I realize that doesn't quite answer your question, but I'm hoping that gives the people listening something to hook onto and something that there is a space that they can connect with other people across the sectors and really kind of make change and progress in the space to support student and staff belonging.
That's great. Thank you so much, Inka. Thank you.
I think to me, very quickly, to build on what Inka said, the reason that we're trying to create we are creating this centre for belonging in education, and it answers your question, is because we've seen how transformative actual belonging can be for students and staff. And we've seen, I have a folder in my inbox of students who were close to dropping out, who I then see at graduation and whose parents come up to me who I've never met and go, thank you, thank you for helping them get through and going on to see their successes. And I think that's why we're trying to build this centre. It's why we want as many people to be involved with it as possible, because the reason universities should invest in belonging, the reason we need to take that time and build it into personal tutoring and workload models is because if we don't, we're going to pay for it down the track, because we're going to have students dropping out. We're going to have fractured communities. And actually, we need to learn how to do this with students, and by doing that, it will help us improve how we build belonging for staff, because we've mentioned about empathy and trust quite a lot. Well, that's also lacking for staff in the sector as well. And so if we can work out how to build that in our institutions and actually across our institutions as well, and not always reinventing the wheel with new ideas, which actually are the same as something that someone else did, that I think is a way of making sure that we're not having to put too much resource into it, but there is a cost benefit there as well, that the money we're putting in is coming back kind of tenfold. And the last thing I'll say is that the We Are Chemistry work that we did helped reduce student dropout by, I can't remember the exact figure, but something like 20 to 25%. Well, if you think about, we spent less than £10,000, well, think of the number of students and the amount of money that kept within the institution, not just tuition fees, but accommodation and everything else as well. I don't like thinking about it in that way, but it is a useful way to try to sell why we do this.
It's also important to mention. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom and Inka. And thank you to all the 76 live listeners, and we'll have a lot later on. So thank you for your time and generosity for coming back and talking about such an important topic, and also your own project and experience. Thank you to Dr. Tom Ritchie and Inka Hyde-Wright. Thank you very much. And Tom, have a fantastic time in the US, and then come back to the show to talk about AI in belonging. And I would like to thank you so much to both of you. I would like to encourage everybody to sign up for the ttradio.org newsletter. We send it every week, highlighting 4 shows. It's not the only show that we are doing here, but there are many others. And also follow us on our social media channels. So that was our show for this Tuesday Twilight show about student belonging. Thank you to our fantastic guests, and I'll see you later in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, and
thanks
so much.
Evening. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class vision.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused